Remember what we were saying before? Where's your website? Remember us talking about this? Where's your website where you are talking about what your platform is, where you're talking about, your key goals here? Where's your website that is basically the central hub for disseminating information? I think we found it, folks. The more that we dig into the longest ballot, the stranger it gets. And we have to ask the question, who really is behind the longest ballot committee? We know about the two brothers, Kieran and Thomas Shukovich, but is that the end of this? Are they truly an independent group? Or are they acting in cooperation and even on behalf of the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada? Let's take a look. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've done many videos on the longest ballot committee, and much to their chagrin, we're going to continue to do so because Canadians deserve the truth of what's actually going on. And one of the things that we noticed that was very interesting is when we started putting out our videos, the longest ballot committee took some of those and started posting them on their Blue Sky social account because they abandoned their X account, towards the end of last year. And they, continued along with this joke narrative of taking critical pieces of them and then turning it into basically satire. Here's another one based on one of the videos that we did, calling us our friends at Northern Perspective are now music critics because we tore apart their ridiculous posts on the Elections Canada website for the website links to their quote-unquote candidates that were basically just going back to terrible music videos and in some cases to Rick Astley videos. Here's another one where they're making fun of Member of Parliament Ned Keurig for supporting and endorsing our petition to end the longest ballot committee. Here's another one of Tanya in one of the shorts that she did, encouraging people to support our petition that we actually had open, which reached over 31,000 signatures. Here's another one based on a post by Mario. Many of you know him as Mario for the North, who was supporting our coverage of the longest ballot committee. And again, longest ballot committee just trying to make fun of the fact that we are critiquing them. This is the last post that they did from us. They thought that the thumbnail was great. Stop the longest ballot. Now, the interesting thing is when we actually put out the videos that dug into their history, talked about who the original organizers were, and really got into the whistleblower and the internal emails and the text messages and the evidence, they didn't post any of that. Isn't that interesting? Now, if you remember in our earlier videos, one of the things that we said is we had so much information on the longest ballot, we couldn't possibly put it all into one video. And in taking a look at X over the last 24 hours, looks like our friend Vesper was doing his own digging as well and came across some of the same information we did. So we decided to expand on that to really show you all of the evidence that we've uncovered. But in order to do that, we have to take you back to the longest ballot logo. So this is the longest ballot logo, and you'll see it on their X account, you'll see it on their Blue Sky account. But the interesting thing about this is not the original logo that they had. And you would be interested to see what was the original logo, as I was. This is the original logo. So this is for the St. Boniface by-election that actually occurred back then. And this is Kieran on the left, and that looks to be Donovan Ekstrom on the right, but it's hard to tell. But we know that's Kieran on the left holding up this poster for the longest ballot committee. You'll notice the colors are primarily red and yellow. Why is that a big deal? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But here it is again on their X post. So this was from the 2021 by-election in St. Boniface, St. Vital in Winnipeg, as you can see. Now, here's another post that we found with this logo. And the curious thing is this is actually from somebody from the NDP. So we have some questions for our NDP folks later after this video. But this is from Megan Waters. And she says, on July 15th, 2022, so honored to receive this amazing gift commemorating having been one of the names on Canada's longest ballot in the 2021 federal election, where I ran for Canada's NDP. 2015 was promised to be the last first past the post election, and the people rose up and spoke out. Thank you so much for this amazing keepsake. We're going to frame it and put it up in our home. Does this mean the NDP actually supports what the longest ballot is doing? Questions that need answering, folks. Well, there's some more interesting things that we need to talk about here. So, as you go through the longest ballot, you end up starting to notice some interesting things. And the more a organization, and that's what they are, an organization like this continues to operate, the longer they continue to operate, they get a little careless, and there's some mistakes that end up coming up. And we started to notice some mistakes. So one of the things that we noticed in many of these election candidates that they put up on the ballot is they put these joke websites up for. We even covered them. We talked about them earlier in this video. And many of them actually link to YouTube videos from a music group, I believe out of Winnipeg, called the Famous Sandhogs. Now, they produced music for these candidates, and they also produced music for the longest ballot committee. I don't know if Kieran Shukovich is a band member, or if he is just a songwriter, or if this was just for the longest ballot, but he ended up writing a couple of songs that the Famous Sandhogs actually produced. One of them, interestingly enough, included a link in its description. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the video that I'm talking about, and you can see at the bottom where it says lyrics by Kieran Shukovich, and there's a link there. Where does that link take you? Well, it's going to take you somewhere very, very interesting. So let's follow the breadcrumbs and head on down the rabbit hole. So this is where it takes you, folks. It takes you to the official website of the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada, where they have this highlighted post of the longest ballot written by Thomas Shukovich. This is where it takes you. And now we seem to understand why the longest ballot committee changed their logo, because if you notice, the colors of the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada logo are the exact colors of the original longest ballot committee logo. No doubt they decided to change it because it kind of reflected too close to home, I guess. We can only speculate at this point, but this is where it takes you. And this was all the way back in September of 2022 that this post was actually put up. But one thing to note, going back a little further, is after Kieran made his court challenge in 2017 and won against the government to actually remove that $1,000 bond, there was a couple of communist and socialist websites that were actually really happy about it. So if you look at this is the People's World, and they have an article December 4th, 2017, where they say Canadian communists welcome court decision lifting election restrictions. And you can see there's a whole article here talking about that and Kieran and his fight and what happened. And another organization on November 29th in 2017 called The People's Voice, they also did a story on this saying that communists are welcoming this type of action and that it is quote unquote allowing people to run, and the Communist Party continues to demand other democratic electoral reforms, etc., etc., etc. So you have a couple of communist websites that are really, really happy about this. But let's go back to the Marxist-Leninist Party website and continue on. So here's an article back in 2021 where they're talking about St. Boniface, St. Vital, taking a stand for electoral freedom, whole article about it. We have an article in June 2024 as we're leading up to the Toronto St. Paul's by-election talking about that. Another post in 2024 talking about the oranges of the longest ballot initiative since they're getting a little bit more press. We have another post, and this is a full PDF for people that are interested. This is their monthly newsletter from the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada website. And at the very top, they're talking about one of their candidates. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But you can see that there's a lot of different media in here talking about the longest ballot, talking about St. Paul's by-election, etc. Here's another article later in that year when the longest ballot committee was looking to run in the LaSalle-Lamar-Verdun by-election. Here's another article back in November of 2024 when the longest ballot committee was responding to the House of Commons committee when they were getting criticism in that from the Conservatives, and they were also getting criticism from Stéphane Perreault, who is the chief electoral officer, who was criticizing and begging the Liberals to actually change the rules. Here's a post from January of this year talking about the longest ballot plans for running in the 2025 federal election. Here's a post from April 18th of 2025 talking about the advanced polling beginning in the federal election. Again, highlighting the longest ballot there at the bottom. You have May 9th after the federal election, and they're talking about the intent for now looking towards the Battle River-Crowfoot by-election. Here's August 1st where they continue their coverage of the longest ballot committee leading up to the election. And here's Saturday, August the 16th, where they're talking about the longest ballot and the by-election in Battle River-Crowfoot. Remember what we were saying before? Where's your website? Remember us talking about this? Where's your website where you are talking about what your platform is, where you're talking about, your key goals here? Where's your website that is basically the central hub for disseminating information? I think we found it, folks. I think we found it. Because you have statements from the longest ballot committee, you have announcements from the longest ballot committee, you have internal press about the longest ballot committee, and we don't find this anywhere else. Let me be clear about that. We barely even find it on the longest ballot committee Twitter websites and Blue Sky. It's all here on the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of Canada's website. So why would it be there? Great question. But it's not only just there. Let's keep going. It's also on the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada's X profile. You can see a post here, and a post here, and a post here, and a post here, and a post here. This is where it gets very interesting, folks, because you'll see that the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada, as part of the 2024 federal by-election LaSalle-Lamar-Verdun, is actually putting up this candidate, and it says, vote to renew the political broadcast. Vote for candidates of the longest ballot project. Isn't that interesting? What do you mean vote for candidates for the longest ballot project? You're supposed to be your own party. You're supposed to be the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada. Are you saying you're acting in cooperation with the longest ballot committee? Well, you seem to be the main news hub for the longest ballot committee over this whole time. But that wasn't the only candidate, folks. Here's another one. LaSalle-Lamar-Verdun, federal by-election. Cast your vote for a candidate who isn't afraid to tackle this outdated electoral system. You'll notice at the top, longest ballot project. And they tag the X location of the X profile of the longest ballot in the bottom left. So, hello? What's going on here? Vote for candidates of the longest ballot project. Again, here's another one, Toronto St. Paul's. This is vote for Marxist-Leninist. But if you read the subtext of this, it says longest ballot project at the top. And then underneath, it says the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada has endorsed Manico Turcotte as its candidate for the June 24th Toronto St. Paul's by-election. Manico is endorsed by the MLPC as a participant in the longest ballot project, through which 79 candidates have registered to highlight the need for electoral reform. The MLPC supports all work which helps renew the political process to empower the people. It supports the demand of the longest ballot project for an end to the first past the post system. Again, linking to the Longest Ballot X profile, and it just underscores that there's a lot more than cooperation going on here. There's even Facebook posts over and over and over again about the longest ballot. So what's the story here, folks? Well, the story is that you have Kieran Shukovich and you have Thomas Shukovich, who seem to be writing for the actual Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada website. Now, the other thing that you need to see is the lyrics for the song that Kieran wrote. If you actually take a look at the lyrics, all of them, what you'll see is that these aren't just lyrics for a parody song. These are essentially taking specific platform and talking points from the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada and dumping them into a song. It's propaganda. So we have to now ask the question. In relation to the Elections Canada Act, a party can only run one candidate in an election. So you have the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada seemingly backing, endorsing, or even is the longest ballot committee. Based on everything that we've seen, that's one of the conclusions you can draw. And you have to ask, okay, so is the longest ballot committee, who seems to be backed and fervently supported by the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada, shouldn't this be classified as one party? They've already admitted to cooperating with them in elections. Like actively cooperating, running under the same purpose. Shouldn't this disqualify all of those candidates? Isn't this actually against the law? And all of the candidates, this is a big question. All the candidates that decided to run for the longest ballot committee, what if you were actually running for the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada? You need to consider that as a possibility here, because it's a possibility we are sure considering based on everything that we've seen. The vast majority of the media, the admission of cooperation, the actual colors of the original logo, all of this links the longest ballot committee, Kieran and Thomas, to the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that the Communist Party of Canada, which is a different political party from the Marxist-Leninist Party, says nothing about the longest ballot committee. Don't mention them on their website. Different colors in their logo. Don't mention Thomas and Kieran. So this isn't an ideological thing, because if it was, the Marxist-Leninist Party and the Communist Party, which, although they're not the exact same platform, they're in the same vein. You would expect both of them to have strong support for that if it's an ideological issue. But they don't mention them at all in their website. The Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada is essentially the home of Kieran and Thomas and the longest ballot committee. You can follow the whole history basically through that website and through the MLP newsletters. So, is this actually what's going on?